For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Batend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we feature leaders of the cannabis industry. We talk to everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. Providing safe cannabis requires testing, and it's becoming a lucrative part of the industry. But in an industry that requires a hefty amount of trust, safety testing requires just that little bit more. Aaron Riley is the CEO of CannaSafe, one of California's leading cannabis testing labs. And if anything, today's conversation centers most on trust. How to convince regulators you're following proper procedures. How do you handle a cannabis company that doesn't want to accept that they've failed a test? Even how to handle a COVID outbreak among staff. I called up Aaron to find out more about transparency and safety in this semi-legal industry where one slip-up could mean completely losing credibility. Let me just start by saying, Aaron, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess my first question might be a weird one, but I feel like we all kind of remember that first time we looked through a microscope and saw a germ or a small thing up close. I guess my question for you is were you a germophobic person, and how do you feel about it now?
That's actually a great question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. Germs. So, I would say I'm pretty clean. I'm pretty into cleanliness and disinfecting stuff. But I'm not a total germaphobe. My mom's actually probably more germaphobe than myself. I'm very conscientious, but I'm not afraid to do something because of germs. But yeah, and as a kid, I didn't really care. I didn't really start using hand sanitizer until probably it was late high school, college.
I don't know if this conversation is going to change anybody's mind. I hope no one comes away with this, but I do think that the moment we're in right now, is making us all think differently about cleanliness and hygiene and bacteria and stuff like that. And especially pre-legalization, it was this thing where you were kind of I don't know where it's coming from, but I don't think that anybody really spent that much time worrying about it. But I literally heard you say on a podcast that actually the most potentially unhealthy or maybe even lethal aspect of cannabis is E. coli. Is that true?
That is true. And that's, it's a killer every year. It kills people. It's on food. It's one of the things that we test for. And that would, that's what I always tell people before, obviously, this vitamin E acetate thing. I always tell people how can cannabis kill you? Or how can I was have you heard about E. coli? And people are like, yes. And E. coli can kill you. So that's the answer there. But yeah, and going back into your statement about the current state of affairs, I would say, yes, definitely. This is we have hand sanitizer everywhere in the office. I've definitely seen people wash their hands more, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
People are definitely hyper conscientious during the current climate.
So I guess a couple of questions there. Can you talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted what you guys do? Obviously, this is a place that needs to stay sanitary, so I'm sure you had a lot of practices in place already. But how has it impacted what you guys do on a daily basis?
Got it. Yeah. Well, it's made it a little bit of a challenge. We are, we're a production laboratory. We don't get to take days off. It's not like we're making a product and we can make it all 1 week and have a week of shutdown. We're pretty much a continuous operation, 7 days a week. And we are in a laboratory setting. We have, over 100 employees, and, there's often times when people have to work closer together. But what we've done is we've, obviously we have had PPE just, as a lab business, you have to have masks and safety glasses and lab coats and stuff, gloves. So that was kind of already part of our current regimen. But what we've incorporated is we've gone above and beyond in cleaning. We have the staff in charge now of cleaning off doorknobs and pretty much anything anybody would touch throughout the day. Every couple hours it's sanitized with alcohol. We try to space people out. 6 feet is ideal. We've kind of moved some shifts around so that instead of having a more concentrated work time. We have people come in really early in the morning. We have some people that work a later shift. So try to get as much space, as many people as for as much square foot as we can.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's really been it. We had an instance where a couple people actually in the lab caught COVID pretty early on, actually, and
Oh,
people were
wow.
freaking out. A lot of people in the industry called me and they're like, "Hey, you were public about it," because we're integrity based and a transparent organization. So I made a statement about that we had people that had gotten COVID and kind of what we did
Hmm.
with it. And a lot of people were calling me like, "Hey, what do you do? Like, what do I do? How do I react? What are the rules and the laws?" And it was cool to be able to help people through that. But we had a situation where a couple people got it, and thankfully it was very isolated. It was in one room, but we actually got to really see how contagious this virus is.
Hmm.
I felt like, I played football in college. I felt like we were breaking down game day film, like, because we were watching like
Ah,
the person that
yeah.
had it and like where they went and who they talked to and like who had a mask on and who didn't. But it was like we
Oh,
probably,
man.
I mean, between like 3 or 4 people watching all the footage and coordinating like the rapid test for everybody. I mean, we spent 30 hours like really trying to make sure that it was an isolated incident, and thankfully it was. But it was interesting to see how contagious it was. And what we kind of found is really the people that got it were in an enclosed room. They were in very close proximity to each other. They were in there for 6 of the 8 hours of the day, and they were not wearing masks while working next to each other. And then there was times when they were
Hmm.
interacting with other people, mask on. Sometimes they didn't. They were in some open areas, but really we were fortunate that only those couple people had it, and some of the other people that had minimal exposure to them did not get it.
Yeah. That's so I think just like I would applaud you as like a consumer, as a citizen, for doing that, because whether it's restaurants or businesses, not everybody is legally compelled to necessarily be upfront and transparent about these sort of situations. Were people kind of reaching out to you and going like, I haven't decided whether or not to disclose, or I haven't decided how to handle this situation, I'm kind of freaking out, like, was
Yeah,
that the conversation, or was more like, we're going to do this and how do we?
I think so. Of everybody, I think maybe one of the companies was like public, and it was a bigger company, and they had to release a statement, and they didn't. It was very vague. So
Mm,
most people weren't. We're just a big business, and like I said, we can't like it's a big problem if we can't operate. So we had to tell people, hey, like, we're still open. We had a case of COVID, but it's not going to impact our operations, and we coordinated kind of what it would look like for all of our clients. But most people were seeking advice, like from a legal perspective, like, can they test everyone? This was in April, so it was very early on. Can they take people's temperatures? How contagious was it? Like, kind of what to do, culturally, right? Because this is early on in a pandemic. People are freaked out. People are depressed. People are germophobic, and nobody wants to have everybody in their organization freaking out about COVID and like not come to work or be nonchalant and infect part of their workforce. So it was more from a business perspective, like, hey, how do we handle this? What are the rules? How do you test people? How do you handle reactions, etc.
sure. And when it comes to like the actual work that you do, I mean, if you had a massive outbreak, is this the kind of job where you can bring people in, very, very quickly? Like, talk a little bit about maybe not like the hiring process, but what kinds of like expertise or backgrounds do people have to be in the industry?
Yeah, so I mean, if the entire, like, worst case scenario, if everybody got sick, I mean, we would basically have to shut down for a couple of weeks if everyone in the lab
Wow.
did. I mean, fortunately, we have good enough coverage, and back then too, we were basically planning like, okay, we wanted to make sure that certain subsets of our workforces didn't come into contact with other people, just in like in worst case scenario, it's like, okay, we would have coverage. We have coverage at, the night shift, so that we can limp along. But yeah, in terms of getting somebody off the street, not likely. Even people from other labs, we do some of the same analysis and tests, but there's unique prep that we have to do. There's just some variations. It's not something where you can walk in off the street and figure it out. I mean, people that have lab experience, they can be pretty efficient and productive by the end of their first or second week.
Switching gears just a little bit, going back to, we mentioned E. coli. How does something like that get introduced to cannabis? And what are some of the other things that you guys find that can cause cannabis to fail a test?
Sure. Yeah. So E. coli is more, so basically we test for microbial, and there's two different, there's bacteria and there's fungus. So fungus being mold, we test for aspergillus. Bacteria is E. coli, and salmonella is the other one we test for. It's just anywhere bacteria could grow. We haven't seen, I would say we've seen a very low amount of samples fail for E. coli. I would guess probably more things on the CBD side, just because there's less regulation, less testing, are probably higher risk for E. coli or salmonella. And you're going to be most likely to see those probably in a food product, unless there was a very dirty cultivation or processing center. But you're most likely going to see them in a food product. The second most likely place would be in flour. Most of the manufactured products are least likely to have any type of microbial contamination. Those are ones that you're going to be more inclined to have either a solvent issue or a pesticide issue. And those are some of the other things we test for. So pesticides, very common. Microbial, heavy metals is another one we test for. Solvents, and then we do like a foreign matter inspection. We test for moisture. We test for water activity. We test potency and terpenes, which are the more fun and exciting things we get to test for.
That's an incredible range of things. And you talked about CBD not necessarily having as many regulations as cannabis. How do all the regulations and standards and potential tests that cannabis have to pass compare to other products, say like food or other consumer goods?
Sure. Yeah. It really depends on the industry. Food is one of those things that's federally regulated. And there's certain lists of pesticides. Most of them are longer than the list of pesticides that we test for in cannabis. That food gets tested for. They do a lot of microbial testing for food. Obviously, that's the biggest thing you see on the news. There's not a lot of food that gets recalled for pesticides, but there is an E. coli outbreak every year. Typically, there's one that happens at a major restaurant chain. But there's a I would say, in terms of like pesticide being a test, we do pesticide. It's common in food. Heavy metals, microbial, solvents, less common in food, but there is some carryover within the food industry of what we test for in cannabis.
Before we talk a little bit more about where we go from here, what the future of testing kind of looks like, I'd love to kind of go back a little bit and hear a little bit how you got to this point in your current position. Do you mind kind of telling me your origin story, kind of how cannabis first touched your life and how you came to be in the industry today?
Absolutely. So cannabis, I was probably 14 or 15. Hopefully my mom doesn't listen to this podcast. Probably the first time I smoked, my sister, who was actually younger than me, she was the influence. So she had got some bought from somebody, and I remember we smoked it. And like the first time, I don't think I was inhaling right. And then the second time, I was just like, I couldn't stop laughing. I think everybody has one of those, like, first time you got high
Yep.
experiences where you just literally can't stop laughing for like 3 hours. So it was great. And then when I was like 15 or 16, I went to California. I was in Santa Rosa. Really good family friend had started growing cannabis in his garage, and this was in like 2006, 2007. And this was actually, it was like a famous garage. Like it was in High Times. It was in a lot of grow magazines. Obviously,
Hmm.
they didn't disclose it was somebody's garage, but they were just like,
Yeah.
showing off. It was basically like a hydro store ad. Like, look at these lights. Like, they were using. It was a top notch setup. It was smell proofed. They had lights on risers. They had great airflow, circulation. I mean, it was
Wow.
it was still nicer than a lot of grows I see today.
Wow.
A lot of commercial grows. And that was a really cool experience for me being 15, 16. It was just, part of it was the fact that it was illegal. So there was some excitement there, but just,
Hmm.
if you haven't been in a cannabis grow, it is a sensory overload. You're
How
smelling
come?
the plants.
Hmm.
It just hits so many of your senses. So there's the smell, right? It depends on what strain's growing, but you got some, like a OG smell, or maybe it's something fruity, but just the smell of weed, just like really
Hmm.
consuming you. You've got the light. So if you're in an indoor grow and the lights are on, you can just kind of feel the warmth coming down from the lights, and they're bright. If
Hmm.
you're in the greenhouse during the day, you're feeling the sunlight hit. The air just moving around. You get kind of some of that tie to when you're in nature, and you're just
Yeah. Yeah.
like appreciating like trees and plants. It's just, so you get a little bit of that. You can touch the buds on the plant, and they're like really sticky. You rub your fingers together, you smell in your nose. So there's just a lot of that stuff going on. So I encourage everyone, if they have the opportunity, to go check out a grow, whether you're into cannabis or not. It's a great experience. For me,
Hmm.
having that experience at 16, it was so impactful. I was like, wow, this is so exciting. This is so cool. This is going to be the future. Like I think at 16, I recognize that, hey, there's an entrepreneurial opportunity here. Like, this is not going to be legal. This is not going to be illegal forever. And there's going to be
Hmm.
an opportunity to participate in an industry that I'm passionate about. And it's fun. It's like, what else? There's not a lot of industries that are more fun than cannabis, especially right now with how the trajectory of legalization. Like, it really is a fun industry to be at the forefront of and participate in. There's a whole cast of characters, um, that are
Yeah.
that are in the industry. But that was so that was kind of that was my light bulb moment for, hey, I've got to do cannabis. Fast forward a couple years, I was 19. I was upset. My parents were getting divorced, so I decided to be a rebel. And then we started financing a cannabis operation on college, and I went from like, started with $300 and turned it into like $75,000 in
Oh my
four
God.
months.
Wow. Wow.
And then that whole thing ended when the police kicked out of the back of this van and arrested me and some other guys. I was on a football scholarship too, and it was very public at the time. So it's
Hmm.
a funny, lighthearted conversation now, but it was really terrible at the time, and it was
Yeah.
terrible for the 3 years following too, just having to deal with the stigma of being arrested and being charged with multiple felonies for cannabis.
How did that impact your scholarship and sort of your like relationships and maybe like the perception that people had of you at that point? Did you feel like that
Yeah, great.
changed really dramatically?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it was a drastic change.
Huh.
So scholarship wise, I got my scholarship pulled. Um,
Wow.
by the time I got out of jail, I didn't have a scholarship. So within like
Wow.
within
Oh my
48 hours
God.
or whatever, 48 or 60 hours, whatever it was. Um, yeah, so didn't have that, and then really I went to it was a small college in the South, and it's in South Carolina too. So there's a significant stigma against cannabis. So a lot of people were like, "Oh my God, how could you do that?" it really changed a lot. It gave me a lot of perspective, right? You have a lot of people, and I think people have more acquaintances than friends. Is what they realize is like if something really bad happened, or if you did something really bad, like I was the same person the day I got out of jail as I was 2 days before, right? People, not everybody knew that we were selling weed, but I was still the same person. Um, and it's what's interesting to see it is people that know that you're doing that, and then you get beat up and arrested for it, and then they think differently of you. It's like
Huh.
you just bought some weed from me
Ah,
last week,
yeah.
you know, and now you're like so disappointed in me that we can't be friends. It's a crazy dichotomy, but
Wait, so
anyway, yeah, it was
you were getting that relationship from like peers, or that reaction from peers as well as like authority figures in your life?
oh yeah, like I had people
Wow.
that I had somebody who I'm not really. There's a lot of people that I just kind of lost contact with. Like, and one of them, one of my former friends was like, he was telling people that I owed him an apology. And I'm like, what do I owe you? What do I have to apologize you for? I'm the one that got beat up and
What?
thrown in jail. It's like, you're not my mom.
Wait, so why did he feel you needed, like, because you betrayed like the football team, or like him?
No, it
Or
wasn't even. It was a personal thing. I'm not. I never really got to the bottom of it. Um, I was just like, okay, I don't really have time to deal with people that think I should apologize. Like, I'm not over here throwing a pity party, but I definitely owe some people an apology, and the people I owe an apology to are my family. Not people the peers that I were friends with. It's like family and people that I had an obligation to, like the football team and coaches and.
were you kind of thinking football was kind of something you wanted to pursue in the future? And where does that leave you, and how do you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I was, my dad got drafted in the NFL. He played a couple of years, and at the time, I was bullish on the potential opportunity and pursuit of it. But I ended up getting back in school. I got back on a football scholarship, Jacksonville University in Florida. And then first year back, I broke my leg and dislocated my elbow. So I never really physically was able to get to the level I was before that. I still went on and had a pro day, and I had an opportunity to go play in Canada, which didn't really at the time wasn't really exciting. I think you can make like 65 grand a year or something. And I was pretty beat up, and I had also started. I started a car business. I started some other businesses, and I was making more money than that at the time. So I was one of those people. Like, I see a lot of people that play college football or college sports, and they really like hang on to that as part of their identity, and they're like, "Oh, I should have been pro, or I should have." And it's like, no, you had a good time. I had a great time. I would do it all over again. Had some great teammates, great experiences, but I didn't need any more of it. And right now, I'm really glad that I stopped. I don't think it would have been good physically to keep going. But so finished out that, started, I started a car business. I started like a little investing consulting business. I got my MBA while I was playing at Jacksonville University. I like really fast tracked school so I could get a master's in addition to my undergrad while I was still on scholarship. And really kind of learned to be busy early on. Cars was something I was passionate about, so that was an easy business for me to get into. And just I learned, that's what I always tell people, because I think people always like to compare themselves to others, which is not the best thing to do. You should really compare yourself against yourself.
Hmm.
But for me, the reason I'm in the position I'm in is because I started very early. I got exposure to a lot of things in business at a young age. Like, I was 22 when I started my car business, and just everything from setting up companies and getting insurance, putting financials together, dealing with uh, you know clients, vendors, etc. I just had a lot of exposure early on, and I learned how not to do business.
Hmm.
I'm still learning how not to do business. But, you know, I learned a lot early on, and then like 2014, 15, I decided to get back into the cannabis space. So I looked at literally every license type in the country. I went to, I started on MJ Biz Daily. So I went to Nevada, I went to Massachusetts, Seattle, Washington, California, and did research on every different type of license or business. And ultimately, I decided to do testing. The other thing that was exciting to me was investing, but I didn't really have any money to invest, not anything significant. So I needed to make a go at a small business. Testing was, at the time, this was in 2016, it was really pretty small. It was pre-regulation. And I just found a good opportunity that I could take down with the resources I had.
So you said you're still kind of figuring out how to do business, but I think that you've also demonstrated that in a number of different situations you've made what I would consider like sort of integrity calls, whether that's the COVID, the way that you handle disclosing COVID and stuff like that. But you're in an industry where your reputation really matters, and trust with the consumer is extremely important, but also transparency and trust with regulators is crucial. So what is that like? And when you're a company that is going to do things above board, what kind of like interactions does that lead to with maybe clients that fail, or people that kind of aren't thinking the same way that you are?
Yeah, it's tough, and that's really the biggest challenge that we've been facing right now is just people. There's an out, right? We fail people now, and a lot of times they'll go, not all the time, but people will go to other labs and they'll start passing, and it's like we know. We were talking about this the other day. We know there's dirty product on the shelf. Like we've seen enough data to know that somebody has a pesticide or somebody has a mold problem. And their answer is, their first answer is, "Hey, you guys made a mistake." And it's like, look, we check failures at least 3 times, and that's 3 consistent data points on any fail. And if there's any variability, then we do, we test in sets of duplicates. So anytime somebody gets a fail, it's not like we just had one test, it was a fail. It's like we are 99% confident in our data. It's really been interesting living in this whole cannabis world, especially on the testing side. Like I've never one time sold my integrity. Like we could put out $1 million award for somebody saying that I changed a safety test, or help somebody through that, and there would be nobody to claim that prize. But what's interesting is a lot of people like I think a lot of people like to talk trash in this industry and talk smack, and it's really kind of weird. There's like the clients all know, like anybody that's a player in cannabis that participates in the industry, they know who we are. They know like we won't do anything sketchy. We won't pick up their unpackaged stuff. We're not the type of one that's like, hey, you should have failed, but we can mix this around. We don't inflate potency numbers. Our whole mantra is consumer safety. We're doing this thing right. Like we want to build a real business. We want to build a real brand. And when you start to cut corners, I see people do it all the time, where like somebody might have a good reputation. They might be doing something relatively right. And then they get desperate and they start inflating potency number. And then all of a sudden people that start having failure issues go to this lab. And it's like, what do I don't understand what they're doing. And even people on the product side, it's like, if you're not in this for the right reasons, you're going to end up hurting somebody. You're not going to build public trust. And you're really, at the end of the day, you're not going to make any money. If you're doing something illegal or dangerous, like you're going to end up getting sued. And you'll just have wasted a nice chunk of your life, trying to create something. So it's not really, worth it to cut corners, especially when it comes to public safety. And, and we live in a glass house too. It's that's part of like the whole COVID thing and just transparency, integrity. I haven't done anything in a while that I would really be upset if people found out about. You just kind of have to live your life like that. Like we're an integrity-based business. People are going to talk shit. People are going to be upset about how certain situations are handled. But at the end of the day, it's like nobody's going to go and have a recording or text message or whatever of Aaron Riley saying something like inappropriate, whatever, cheating, lying, racist, you name it. It's not going to happen. and you just have to live like that.
That's interesting. Do you have any like thoughts on the actual testing that's required and the regulations right now? Like, do you have any sympathy for perhaps the state of affairs for some of these companies who are like, I failed? Are there situations where maybe the testing is inadequate or not hitting the mark? Or do you kind of just, acknowledge that people are doing their best and kind of work within the parameters that are set?
Yeah, so we see it kind of twofold, and we're not excited about failing
Of course.
anybody. It's terrible. It's like, because I would hate to be the other person, right? I would hate to get the report and be like, it's like $50,000 or $100,000 sometimes.
Wow.
So, pretty high stakes. So first of all, it's terrible for us to have to share that. But our goal is always to help somebody. Like, hey, if you had a problem, like, let's fix it. Let's figure it out. Here's people that do remediation for pesticide. Here's people that do remediation for mold. Like, let's check out your facility and make sure there's no cross contamination or whatever it is. Like, we're problem solvers. Obviously we have to report and we have to do, our duty to consumer safety in the state, and report accurate results to our clients. But, after that, it's like, hey, how can we help make sure this never happens again? Like, and we've gotten really good. We have a really great core base of clients that take consumer safety seriously, and they test at points in their process and they know different variables and deviations. And those are the people that rarely have problems. Like, we have clients that probably haven't filled a batch in over a year and they make hundreds of, product batches. I mean, they're selling millions of units of products. So pretty good, but they're not just the type of person that just like rolls a batch in and they're just like, oh, test it, I've made it great. And it's like, wait, hold on. You have a manufactured product, that you should have tested the flour that went into this, the crude, you should have tested the additives, that, the non-cannabis additives. So we've got a pretty good process and we get so much exposure, like broad market exposure, because we see everybody trying to launch whatever type of product that we can save people a lot of time and money in terms of telling them how not to do stuff.
I know that recently it was reported that there's some potential guidelines from the FDA concerning CBD that apparently it's been sort of within the Trump administration's ability to sign off or impact this bill. And now it's looking like of course, the future's always kind of unpredictable these days, but it looks like I read an article that Trump's administration probably will not get a chance to sign off on this. What does guidelines from the FDA concerning CBD mean for the industry?
That means regulations coming. So the FDA just released a contract. I mean, basically like a contract-based study, but they're going to test a bunch of random CBD products from different sources all over the country. And I think it's a 3-year project. So I imagine that by the end of that timeline, we're going to probably see some regulations, maybe before, if they're getting good data at a certain velocity. But I'm excited about it because, standardization is coming. We're playing with a lot of bad actors, and unfortunately there's a lot of product on the shelf that doesn't line up. I think there's a little bit of a frenzy by people like, hey, get the COA, check these products. People understand the game now. I think from a public perspective, like, people ask me all the time, hey, where can I find CBD for my dog or my grandma, or hey, I'm trying to sleep. Where's a product to trust? I know where there's clean product. So I think that, there's definitely interest on, from a consumer perspective. And I think that the CBD regulations will come first at a federal level. Whatever they end up doing for CBD will probably become kind of the minimum bar for cannabis. But I still think we're several years out. I think we're 2 to 3 years out. And even on, legalization, I think it's really not a are we going to have legalization? It's going to, when are we going to have legalization? Sure. I think the Democratic presidential nomination is going to increase the velocity, but I still think it's going to take 2 to 3 years. I mean, we're kidding ourselves if we think it's going to happen faster than that. I mean, we can't even get a second stimulus.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't even know why I laughed. It's just so ridiculous. So I guess like maybe the last question for you is, how does all this change impact you? We've seen sort of like a layering of regulations where heavy metal testing was sort of introduced after the fact, as states added more regulations. When something like that happens, like, do you guys get a heads up? Do you get some time to kind of prepare and get the equipment or the processes in place? Or is this stuff just literally a surprise to you as much as it is to anyone else?
So California actually did a great job of putting out like draft regulations and giving people a lot of time to get adjusted and prepare. So I will say, in terms of California, yes, there was ample time to prepare. And some of these other states, the people will set up a testing lab and they'll kind of start testing stuff. Like even in California, before there was testing, like we didn't know batch size, we didn't know any of these things, and we were still like, hey, we're going to test pesticides, we're going to test solvents, we're going to test metals. We didn't know when, what, how, why until probably like 3 months or so before the regulations hit. But we had a general idea. So there, most states I've seen, they have a rulemaking period, and you'll at least, I would say the minimum, have a 3-month heads up. Most of the time it's like 6 to 9 months.
Wow. I guess actual final question. What are you said a couple more years for the industry. What's the future for you and CannaSafe? Is it an expansion of what you guys are kind of doing now? Or does that kind of depend on what the future holds in terms of legalization?
Yeah, so we are gung-ho expanding, regardless of legalization. We're actually expanding fast as we can, just because, right now there's not really any multi-state lab operators. We're 3 or 4 months away from having 4 labs, and I think we're a year away from having double-digit labs. So we're expanding as fast as we can. The competitive climate right now is very weak. There's not a lot of legitimate operators. I don't think a lot of the competition is going to survive bigger regulation. So for us, it's expand as big as we can up until that legalization point, and then I think there's going to be a lot of M&A at that point. You're going to have all these multi-billion-dollar international lab players that are going to be interested in cannabis. They're going to buy their way into the market somehow. So kind of at that point, depending on how big we get, it's like, do you want to compete? Do you want to sell? Like, what's the game plan? But right now, we're driving as much expansion activity as we can until the market changes, which the next big change will be legalization.
And you mentioned bad actors, and there have been a few labs that have come under fire or had repercussions for doctoring results or putting out bad results or nefarious behavior. I imagine, do you think about the trust that you're building with regulators, with state bodies, as part of the value that you're building, that the company builds?
Absolutely. Just to give you a little bit of insight, something that we're working on kind of confidentially, we've been contacted by international governments asking us, like, hey, how do we come up with rules?
Wow.
So, we're working with several international, like basically countries, governments, in terms of like how to regulate cannabis and hemp. So yeah, it's definitely been significant. We've noticed, like, when we go to new states, like regulators, whether they know us or they Google us, they're like, okay, we recognize, like, they're willing to have a conversation much faster. And then in California, we have a great relationship with the regulators here, just because we've been, kind of the largest lab for a couple of years now in California. We send a lot of COAs. We have a lot of interactions with them. So we've got a solid reputation and relationship with them here, and really looking to carry that across the country. I think there's going to be an opportunity for contributing to the kind of the test making. And we've seen some proposals, like even the FDA proposal to test CBD. It was really interesting because there wasn't a lot of experience, like just in terms of the methods and parameters that they were outlining. There was not a lot of alignment with with what's common practice.
That's interesting. That's really, really interesting. Well, I feel like I could talk to you forever, but I'm going to pause it here. That's an incredible position to be in, and thank you for keeping us all safe.
Thanks for having me. More to come.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground@TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. The show is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Batend, and thank you for listening.